Chapter 1468. Sword Heart Island was vast and boundless. It was as big as the chaotic land. On the east side of Sword Heart Island stood a stone stele. This stone stele was huge and it was 1,000,000 zhang tall. On the stone stele, there was a black word, sword. The word, sword, was like a living creature, constantly moving about as if it was executing a peerless sword art. However, upon closer inspection, the word, sword, had not moved at all. The word, sword, was special. It seemed to be able to transmit images through time and space. No matter how far it was, it could be seen. Of course, the farther away it was, the less power it had to bear. Correspondingly, it would be less enlightened. In front of the stone stele, there were many seats arranged in a fan shape. They were simple cushions. The cushions were far away from each other so they wouldn't disturb others. There were thousands of rows. Yi Chen and Sword Saint stopped at the 2,500th row. Yi Chen said, "Sword Saint, I want to go a bit further." "Alright, don't force yourself." The Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint had already gotten used to this. Although Yi Chen's overall power was not as strong as his ability to endure the power of the word was much stronger than his. In fact, the Sword Saint could still move forward a few hundred rows, but that would be close to his limit. It would be very hard to comprehend the word when he was close to his limit, and he would not be able to maintain it for a long time. Sword Saint found a seat nearby and sat down cross-legged. He started to look at the word. The word was too powerful. The entire Sword Heart Island felt like it was covered in mercury. The air was as heavy as water. Every step forward was a burden. Yi Chen stopped at the 1,800th row. Before condensing godly power, Yi Chen could only reach this point. If he went any further, he wouldn't be able to concentrate. Those who were in front of him were all sword saints who had condensed godly power. The word, sword, written by the sword god was boundlessly profound, as if it was the origin of the sword Tao. Looking at the word, sword, could not only improve one's heart energy, it could improve other aspects as well. Of course, this improvement couldn't be achieved overnight. It was like the absorption of nutrients. The better the absorption, the more nutrients one would absorb. As for those who couldn't absorb it well, they would still be able to improve after a long period of accumulation. Sensing the power of the word, Yi Chen tried his best to observe the word, trying to understand its profoundness. After 100 years, the Dan Yun Sword Saint left. Many people left, but many people came. The number of people didn't change much. It's Sword Saint Limitless. Sword Saint Limitless is here. A voice somehow reached Yi Chen's ears. Shifting his gaze away from the word, Yi Chen raised his head. A figure flew across the sky. This figure was not very tall and bald, but his back and shoulders were very wide and thick. He wore a gray robe and had a kind face. His eyes were very gentle, but this kind of gentleness was not one without anger. Instead, it was a gentleness that had seen through everything. Infinite Sword Saint. Yi Chen thought to himself. Limitless Sword Saint was one of the two ultimate sword saints of Sword God Palace. Apart from idealistic Sword Saint, he was the existence closest to the true God realm of Sword Tao. Of course, before becoming a true god, he was still in the realm of Sword Saint. His temperament was vastly different from that of a true god. Yi Chen quickly retracted his attention and continued reading the word. After 50 years, Yi Chen stood up. "I have surpassed my limit." Yi Chen flew towards the exit of Sword Heart Island as fast as lightning. Every time he came to Sword Heart Island, Yi Chen would push himself to his limit and then surpass it. It was very dangerous. If he was lucky, he would go mad. If he was not lucky, his mind would break. It had happened before. The reason why Yi Chen dared to do this was because he didn't think it was as dangerous as he thought it would be. The limit of life wasn't fixed. Sometimes you thought it was your limit, but as long as you had a strong will, you could break it. Of course, don't overestimate your will. There was a limit to everything. The real danger was in this limit. If you could control it well, it wouldn't be too dangerous and you could improve quickly. If you didn't, something bad would happen sooner or later. I've improved again. After leaving Sword Heart Island, Yi Chen sensed that his heart power was more condensed. When it was condensed to the extreme, it would give birth to the light of the soul, which was the sword of the soul. Mission Tower. Thousands of missions would be issued in the mission tower every day. According to the difficulty, the missions were divided into 9 levels. From low to high, they were 1 star, 2 star, 3 star, and the hardest, 9 star. 1 star to 3 star missions corresponded to sword saints who hadn't condensed God power. 4 star to 6 star missions corresponded to sword saints who had condensed God power. 7 star to 9 star missions corresponded to ultimate sword saints, especially the 9 star missions. Only the idealistic sword saint and infinite sword saint had completed them. The mission tower had a total of 9 floors. The first floor corresponded to 1 star missions, the second floor corresponded to 2 star missions, and so on. The reward for 1 star missions wasn't very generous. The highest reward was 1,000. Although it could be accumulated as long as one completed a lot of 1 star missions, one could still get a lot of contribution points. Yichin didn't want to go through so much trouble. The highest reward for 2 star missions was 5,000. The highest reward for 3 star missions was 30,000. The highest reward for 4 star missions was 200,000. However, it was too difficult. Only sword saints who had condensed God power could complete it. Capture spiritual clouds. 10,000 contribution points for each one you capture. Yichen had found a pretty good 3-star mission, which could be done repeatedly. Capturing 1 beam of spirit mist would complete the mission. The more you captured, the more contribution points you would get. A lot of sword saints were taking on this mission. This is it. Yichen accepted the mission. Spiritual clouds were a special kind of essence energy in the celestial realm. They were abundant in the spiritual cloud mountain range. Spiritual clouds could be used to refine sage artifacts, set up magic arrays, or fused with God power to increase the might of God power. The one who issued this mission was not an ordinary sword saint. It was one of the ultimate sword saints, the spiritual cloud sword saint. I'm afraid only an ultimate sword saint would be so rich. The reward for 1 spiritual cloud wasn't much, but 1,000 or 10,000 was a lot. Ordinary sword saints couldn't afford such a high reward. The spiritual cloud mountain range wasn't close to the sword god palace. There was no god's teleportation array between them, so one could only fly slowly. 10 years later, Yichen arrived at the spiritual cloud mountain range. The majestic spiritual cloud mountain range was like a divine mountain range. It was unfathomably deep and unfathomably tall. Everywhere was filled with spiritual light. It was clearly a blessed land of the celestial realm. Swish. After entering the spiritual cloud mountain range, Yichen suddenly discovered a ray of light chasing after an intermediate sword saint. This ray of light was as sharp as a sword. It was the spiritual cloud. Without much hesitation, Yichen's figure flashed. When he approached the spiritual cloud, he made a grabbing motion with his hand. The power of the 5 elements permeated out and enveloped the spiritual cloud. The spiritual cloud was still struggling and rampaging, causing Yichen's blood to boil. He was inwardly shocked. No wonder it's a 3-star mission. If I hadn't comprehended the 5 elements and could use the power of the 5 elements, I wouldn't have been able to capture the spiritual cloud so easily. Capturing spiritual clouds wasn't like fighting. Divine skills were useless. One could only rely on one's own strength. Chapter 1469. My name is Radiant Star. May I know your name? Seeing that the light cloud was captured, the mid-grade sword saint's silhouette flickered as he flew over. My name is Green Lotus. Yichen replied. Green Lotus sword saint, I wonder if you could return the light cloud to me? The Radiant Star sword saint felt somewhat depressed. Earlier, although he was being chased by the light cloud, the actual situation wasn't like that. The light cloud could only be captured, it couldn't be forcefully attacked. Otherwise, it would reach the limit of the light cloud's endurance and shatter. Hence, the Radiant Star Sword Saint had no way to display his strength and could only rely on his physical strength to capture the light cloud. Evidently, Yichen hadn't heard of this before and was somewhat startled. The tone of the Radiant Star Sword Saint wasn't rude and unreasonable. Yichen didn't feel that the Radiant Star Sword Saint was being unreasonable. Seeing that Yichen didn't seem to know anything, the Radiant Star Sword Saint told Yichen about the light cloud. So that's the case. I was too rash. Yichen returned the light cloud to the Radiant Star Sword Saint. The Radiant Star Sword Saint had an embarrassed expression on his face. Speaking of which, I was the one who benefited. If not, I would need at least 10 days to capture this light cloud. Unwilling to take advantage of Yichen, the Radiant Star Sword Saint shared his experience with Yichen. Usually, when the air is agitated, it means that there's a light cloud nearby. Remember, don't go to the depths of the valley. Although there are many light clouds there, there's a high possibility of being surrounded and attacked by many. When the number of light clouds reaches a certain level, a light cloud beast will be formed. The strength of the light cloud beast is extremely terrifying. Even the elementary divine technique I comprehended from the 420th divine inscription diagram was unable to injure it. And even if you could injure it, it would only cause it to dissipate. Hearing the Radiant Star Sword Saint's explanation, Yichen nodded his head repeatedly. These are my experiences. You should be careful. Many thanks for the information. These experiences were extremely useful to Yichen. After chatting for a while, the two of them separated. The first one he caught was 5 years later. Although there were a lot of spirit clouds in the Spirit Cloud Mountain, it was way too huge, and the spirit clouds were hidden too deep. It would not come out easily. This was the second spirit cloud that Yichen had seen in 5 years. 10,000. Yichen wasn't anxious at all. He was already prepared to stay here for a long time. The second one was 20 years later, the third 35 years later, and the fourth 52 years later. After 100 years, Yichen had captured 7 spirit clouds. Although it didn't seem like much, the efficiency was actually quite high. Many times, discovering the spirit clouds didn't mean that one could capture them. If it were any other sword saint, being able to capture 1 spirit cloud in 100 years would already be a great achievement. Most importantly, without comprehending complementary laws, sword saints couldn't carry too many spirit clouds. Yichen had the 5-element space, which could store spirit clouds, but other sword saints didn't. Therefore, every time they captured a spirit cloud, they would have to return, which would take 20 years. In the blink of an eye, Yichen had stayed in the Spirit Cloud Mountain range for 5,000 years. In these 5,000 years, Yichen had obtained 300 light clouds, which was 3 million contribution points. To Yichen, this was definitely a windfall. Of course, to sword saints who had condensed divine power, this was probably just a small fortune. Every level had their own values. For an ultimate sword saint, 100 or 2 million wasn't much at all. No one would be so bored as to come here to capture the spiritual clouds. If they had the time, they could do more meaningful things. The 5-element space can't take it anymore. Originally, Yichen wanted to stay for a while longer and gather 1,000 beams of spirit clouds. However, the 5-element space had its limit. Although 300 beams of spirit clouds seemed to be a lot gentler after being captured, they still possessed a powerful destructive power. The inside of Yichen's 5-element space was now full of holes. After returning to Sword God Palace, Yichen went to the mission tower and chose to submit the mission. I've already transferred 3 million contribution points to you. The mission tower also had a puppet sword saint. They were all sentient and were in charge of a large amount of contribution points. These contribution points were all transferred over by the person who issued the mission. Those who completed the mission would be able to obtain a corresponding amount of contribution points from the puppet sword saint. Evidently, the Cloudy Spirit Sword Saint had transferred a large amount of contribution points to the puppet sword saint. In front of Yichen, there were many people submitting this mission. The mission tower had a special storage space. After a period of time, the Cloudy Spirit Sword Saint would come over to collect the light clouds. Not being able to see the Cloudy Spirit Sword Saint, Yichen felt a little regretful. The ultimate sword saint was extremely elusive. Yichen had only seen the Snowheart Sword Saint and the Limitless Sword Saint. Although the ultimate sword saint would be on the Swordheart Island, the distance was too far and it was basically impossible to see him. Everyone could only see the word sword. The reason why he was able to see the Limitless Sword Saint was because the Limitless Sword Saint just so happened to pass by the vicinity of Yichen. 3 million contribution points. In addition to my own contribution points, I have a total of 3,600,000 contribution points. I should be able to exchange for the 6th to 9th beginner stage divine inscription diagrams. However, there's no rush for now. He wasn't in a hurry to exchange for it, nor was he in a hurry to comprehend the divine arts. Yichen decided to first earn enough contribution points before doing anything else. The second time, Yichen spent 5,500 years to capture 300 streams of light clouds. The third time, Yichen spent 4,800 years to capture 300 streams of light clouds. The 10th time, Yichen spent 5,200 years to capture 300 streams of light clouds. After 10 times, Yichen earned a total of 30 million contribution points. And after 50,000 years, Yichen even took some time to go to the Sword Heart Island to look at the word sword. In any case, he didn't spend too much time looking at the word sword. Coincidentally, after submitting the mission for the 10th time, the Cloudy Spirit Sword Saint's mission was cancelled. It should be because the amount of light clouds was sufficient. After exchanging for the 6th to 10th beginner stage divine inscription diagrams, Yichen started his closed-door meditation. 200,000 years passed in a flash. Yichen had comprehended 5 different divine arts. The divine art he comprehended from the 10th beginner stage divine inscription diagram was Blade Heart. As the 10th divine art, the might of Blade Heart was much stronger than the 5th divine art, Floating Blood. However, it was still insufficient to help Yichen pass the 15th level of the Sword God Pagoda. After some consideration, Yichen exchanged for the 100th beginner stage divine inscription diagram. 120,000 years passed. On the Green Lotus Island. In the sky above the vast and empty island, the void seemed to have split apart. The sky was filled with cross-shaped cracks, and within the cross-shaped cracks, a strange luster flowed like blood and ink. 100th divine art, soul severing. So powerful! These 10 million contribution points were not spent in vain. The higher the level of the divine inscription diagrams, the more terrifying the divine arts would be. The Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint's strength was much weaker than Yichen's, but by relying on the 350th divine art, Sword Chidanxia, he forcibly passed the 17th level of the Sword God Pagoda. From this, one could very well imagine how great the increase in strength of a divine art was. After I completely perfect soul severing, I can challenge the Sword God Pagoda again. Comprehension and perfection were two different things. In these hundreds of thousands of years, Yichen had already perfected the first 10 divine arts. He believed that perfecting soul severing wouldn't take too long. Chapter 1470. I can't. After a while, you will be stronger than me. Dan Yun's Sword Saint was upset. Yichen was improving way too fast. He had mastered the 350th godly skill, Sword Chidanxia. When he waved his sword, the sword chi was like a red cloud, but he still couldn't suppress Yichen. Yichen's 100th godly skill, Soul Slash, kept tearing him apart. Again. The best way to perfect a godly skill was to fight. As he fought with Dan Yun's Sword Saint, Yichen's Soul Slash was getting better and better. Of course, it was also because Snow Heart Sword Saint had practiced the 100th godly skill, but his 100th godly skill was called Cold Heart Slash. Come on. I am going to try my best. Dan Yun's Sword Saint looked serious. The sword chi became denser, like the red clouds in the sky, red like blood. Like the spring wind and rain, Yichen's Soul Slash was broken by the sword chi. It was no longer as strong as before. Finally, Yichen couldn't block Dan Yun's Sword Saint's attack anymore, and he was blown away. Even though Dan Yun's Sword Saint didn't master the complementarity element, his fire element and water element were at a high level, at least higher than Yichen's. After all, he hadn't been cultivating for a long time. However, fire element and water element were much weaker than the 5 elements, so it didn't matter how high his level was. In terms of godly skills, Dan Yun's Sword Saint was much stronger than Yichen. The 100th godly skill couldn't compare to the 350th godly skill. Dan Yun's sword Qi Danxia was perfected, while Yi Chen's soul slash was still lacking. Therefore, when Dan Yun's sword Saint got serious, Yi Chen wasn't a match for him. He was easily blown away. Impressive! Yi Chen flipped in the air and landed on the ground. They were just fighting, so Dan Yun's sword Saint didn't use too much power. He held back at the critical moment, otherwise Yi Chen wouldn't have gotten out of it. Don't compliment me. My godly skills are just a bit better than yours. The Dan Cloud Sword Saint smiled bitterly. With the Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint as his training partner, Yi Chen's speed of perfecting his soul slash had increased by leaps and bounds. Most importantly, he had seen the Snow Heart Sword Saint perform the 100th divine skill, and its charm had been imprinted in his mind for a long time. Relying on his frightening comprehension of the Sword Dao, Yi Chen had shortened the time required for perfecting the soul slash by hundreds of times. It had only taken him 2,000 years to completely perfect the soul slash, which was much faster than perfecting the previous 10 divine skills. On the 15th floor of the Sword God Pagoda. On the 16th floor of the Sword God Pagoda. After perfecting the divine technique, soul severing, Yi Chen immediately went to challenge the divine Sword Pagoda. He went from the 14th floor to the 16th floor and obtained close to 5 million contribution points. In this way, Yi Chen's current contribution points were still more than 21 million. My Soul Slayer has already been perfected. It's about time for me to exchange for an even better elementary level Sword Dao Divine Inscription diagram. No matter who it was, there was no limit to the pursuit of godly skills. Yi Chen was no exception. After spending 20 million contribution points, Yi Chen exchanged for the 200th beginner level Sword Doctrine Divine Pattern. This Sword Dao Divine Inscription diagram had a cluster of stamens drawn on it. The brushwork was still that extremely simple style. With just a few light strokes, it was extremely lifelike and contained boundless profundities. In the center of the heaven realm, there was a plane that was as old as the heaven realm. The plane was boundless and had no beginning or end. Here, it was always in a state of dusk. Even the main god's sun and true god's stars couldn't shine on this place. There was an extremely ominous aura in this place. The Twilight Plane was one of the most dangerous places in the heaven realm since ancient times. Other than the law of primal chaos, there was also the law of dusk that covered the Twilight Plane. The law of dusk was the absolute law of all things. Anyone who stayed here for a long time would be on the decline. True gods were no exception. However, the Twilight Plane had always been a lively place. Every time a god war broke out, the Twilight Plane would definitely be one of the main battlefields. Many true gods had fallen here, and the number of demigods that had fallen here was as many as the stars in the sky. The number of demigods that had fallen here was countless times more than the number of demigods that were still alive in the heaven realm. Because true gods had fallen here, the Twilight Plane was also an important source of god stones. The flesh and blood of true gods mixed with the soil of the Twilight Plane would form god stone mines or god stone pits. Of course, with the passage of time, the exposed god stone mines and god stone pits were long gone. The remaining god stone mines and god stone pits were all hidden under the Twilight Plane. It wasn't an easy task to find them. Other than god stone mines and god stone pits, the Twilight Plane was also a place where demigods fought each other. Every true god force had a god's transfer array that led to the Twilight Plane. In the Twilight Plane, killing a demigod from the Divine Alliance could earn a certain amount of contribution points. For example, killing a primary battle saint and obtaining their token would earn 1 million contribution points. Killing an intermediate battle saint would earn 10 million contribution points. Killing an advanced battle saint would earn 1 billion contribution points. Killing an ultimate battle saint would earn 100 billion contribution points. This was only for demigods from ordinary true god forces. Demigods from main god forces were worth even more. Killing a primary battle saint from a main god's force would give him 10 million contribution points. Killing an intermediate battle saint from a main god's force would give him 100 million contribution points. Killing an advanced battle saint from a main god's force would give him 10 billion contribution points. Killing an ultimate battle saint from a main god's force would give him 1 trillion contribution points. That's right, a direct increase of 10 times. Demigods from main god forces were too monstrous and too difficult to kill. To the sword sages of the Sword God Palace, the contribution points obtained from clearing the Sword God Pagoda could only be obtained once and couldn't be repeated. If they wanted to obtain more contribution points, they had to clear the higher floors, complete missions, or come to the Twilight Plane. Compared to completing missions, killing demigods from the Divine Alliance was much faster. However, the prerequisite was that one had to be strong enough. This was the first time Yi Chen came to the Twilight Plane. Accompanying him were the Scarlet Cloud Sword Sage and the Radiance Star Sword Sage. The Radiant Star Sword Sage was even stronger than the Scarlet Cloud Sword Sage. He had comprehended the 420th Divine Skill, Vast Star Transformation. So this is the Twilight Plane? It had been 150,000 years since Yi Chen comprehended the 200th Primary Sword Dao Divine Pattern. Yi Chen had successfully comprehended the 200th Divine Skill, Sword Flower in Full Bloom. With the help of Sword Flower in Full Bloom, Yi Chen had passed the 17th floor of the Sword God Pagoda. His strength was now at the same level as the Scarlet Cloud Sword Sage and the Radiant Star Sword Sage. Sensing that their strength was increasing slowly and the difficulty of earning contribution points had increased, the three of them decided to venture into the Twilight Plane. With the three of them working together, it was still possible for them to kill an intermediate battle saint. When the time came, they would split the contribution points evenly and each of them would obtain more than 3 million contribution points. If they could kill a few more battle saints, this trip would not be in vain. Of course, searching for divine stones was also one of their goals. Be careful. Other than enemy demigods, there are also twilight evil spirits in the Twilight Plane. This wasn't the first time the Radiant Star Sword Sage had come to the Twilight Plane. He couldn't help but remind Yi Chen and the Scarlet Cloud Sword Sage. I have never seen a twilight evil spirit before. I heard that it is very difficult to deal with. It is formed by the resentment of the Twilight Plane. The Scarlet Cloud Sword Sage's solemn face was filled with curiosity. Chapter 1471. Dusk Evil Spirits are very frightening. The weakest Dusk Evil Spirit is stronger than us, and the strongest Dusk Evil Spirits are even feared by Ultimate Battle Saints. Dusk Evil Spirits come in all shapes and sizes, and each form has a different fighting style. You have to be careful of those incomparably huge Dusk Evil Spirits. Usually, these Dusk Evil Spirits have a wide attack range, and you won't be able to escape even if you want to. The Radiant Star Sword Saint told them everything he knew. Don't worry, we can always escape if we can't beat them. Unless we are unlucky and encounter a gigantic Dusk Evil Spirit. The Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint smiled. Flying above the Dusk Plane, Yi Chen's group was very cautious. There were more Dusk Evil Spirits in the Dusk Plane than they had imagined. After a month, they had already encountered more than a dozen. The Dusk Evil Spirits came in all shapes and sizes. Some looked like trees, and only when they attacked would they be noticed. Some looked like centipedes, burrowing out from the ground. Some were flat and spread on the ground like a large lawn. There were also Dusk Evil Spirits that floated in the sky. They were transparent and difficult to scan with soul power. A few days ago, the three were almost surrounded by a Dusk Evil Spirit in the form of a lawn. With the strength of the Dusk Evil Spirits and the frightening power of the Dusk Law, they were not far from death. The Dusk Plane is much more dangerous than I imagined. The Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint sighed. The Radiant Star Sword Saint said, "Get used to it. As long as we are careful, there won't be any accidents." Then be careful. Yi Chen nodded. Although the Dusk Evil Spirits were hard to guard against, they were not very fast. Another month passed in a flash, and the three found a prey. According to the aura of the token, they could determine that the opponent was a demigod of the Dark Alliance. The one who discovered this demigod was Yi Chen. The Netherworld Sacred Eye allowed him to lock onto the opponent from far away, and the opponent was completely unaware. Just in case, the three flanked from 3 directions. Yi Chen attacked first. A soul slash was unleashed, and the void cracked, emitting a pitch-black light. A powerful suction force locked onto the opponent. This was a demigod with blood-red tentacles on his head. His eyes were like light bulbs and he was extremely frightening. However, he was panicking at this moment. Yi Chen's attack was much stronger than his. Even though they were both demigods, there were still differences. His body exploded, and this demigod turned into a streak of bloody light that shot out, escaping from Soul Slayer's range. This was the blood escape technique of the Law of Blood. Sword Chi red glow. The Dan Cloud Sword Saint stopped him. His red sword chi was like clouds in the sky, covering the blood light. Needless to say, it was not easy to kill a mid-level demigod who had comprehended the precepts. After all, this was not the Chaos battlefield. The mid-level demigods in the Chaos battlefield did not comprehend the precepts. In the Heaven realm, although most of the mid-level demigods did not comprehend the precepts, there were still quite a few who had comprehended the precepts. This was especially so for the forces of the main gods. Every member of the forces had comprehended the precepts and had cultivated for countless years. After breaking through the sword chi, the blood-red light shot in another direction. Star's transformation. The Radiance Star Sword Sage's attack had arrived. The Radiant Star Sword Saint's attacks were even more powerful than the Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint's and Yi Chen's attacks. As soon as he used his 420th skill, the sword chi filled the sky, as if countless stars were blinking. Pu. The bloody light was riddled with holes and was forced to reveal itself. Sword flower blooming. Sword chi red glow. Yi Chen and the Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint, who had rushed over, released their divine skills together and attacked. Not bad, we killed one. The three of them were very happy to have killed a mid-level battle saint. After all, this was 10 million contribution points. Compared to challenging the Sword God Pagoda, killing a hostile demigod from the Divine Alliance was much easier and more contribution points could be obtained. Of course, it was also very dangerous. It was very possible that you would become someone else's prey. The danger came so suddenly. After the three of them killed 3 mid-level battle saints, they suddenly encountered an advanced battle saint. Moreover, it was an advanced battle saint from a main god's force. Advanced battle saints from main god's force had almost 100% condensed godly power and comprehended the precepts. Dai. Battle Saint Rider was an advanced battle saint from the God of Destruction Palace. His strength was not considered outstanding among the advanced battle saints of the God of Destruction Palace. He was just an ordinary member, but he was more than enough to deal with 3 mid-level sword saints. The giant scimitar slashed out, and the plane below the 3 of them instantly cracked. It was as if a demon had opened its mouth. Poof. The Radiant Star Sword Saint comprehended the Starlight precepts. His Starlight form was merely grazed by the blade energy, and the starlight immediately dissipated. He was seriously injured, and more than 10% of his martial yuan shun was obliterated. The Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint comprehended the fire and water precepts. Even though he was using the fire travel technique, his fire travel technique was also destroyed by the blade energy. He was also seriously injured and fell to the ground, creating a large hole in the plane. Yi Chen was even more unlucky. Battle Saint Rider had focused his attack on him, so the blade energy directly hit him. Fortunately, Yi Chen used the 5 elemental fire escape technique. With the protection of the 5 elemental precepts, this blade energy obliterated less than 10% of his martial yuan shin. The injury he suffered was similar to that of the Radiant Star Sword Saint and the Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint. Is this the strength of a powerful demigod? To be honest, this was the first time Yi Chen saw the true strength of a powerful demigod. Although the Sweet Dew Sword Saint and the Shadowless Sword Saint had shown some of their strength, they had not really fought with Yi Chen. On the Chaos battlefield, although the level 9 Chaos creatures were comparable to powerful demigods, they were not good at using the precepts. You are indeed different after comprehending the complementary precepts. Battle Saint Rider grinned. An ordinary intermediate battle saint would definitely not be able to block a single blade attack from him. Only those who comprehended the complementary precepts would be able to become ultimate battle saints in the end. If that's the case, then I won't be able to tolerate you. Battle Saint Rider's killing intent intensified. Fierce tiger slash. With a slash, the blade energy transformed into a ferocious tiger that pounced towards Yi Chen's group. This was not an ordinary blade art, but a divine skill. He did not even use his full strength in the first slash. Too powerful. The Radiant Star Sword Saint and the Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint were about to lose all hope. Tears of ice and snow. Suddenly, a teardrop flew over from afar and froze the ferocious tiger blade energy. Then, it pierced through Battle Saint Rider's forehead. Crack, crack, crack. Battle Saint Rider's entire body turned into an ice sculpture and shattered. His martial Yuan Shin immediately collapsed. This meant that the power of the attack had far exceeded the limits of his martial Yuan Shin. It's Sword Saint Snow Heart. Yi Chen turned his head to look. Beside the silver-haired Sword Saint Snow Heart were other high-level Sword Saints as well as some Battle Saints that Yi Chen did not recognize. Without exception, these people were all high-level demigods who had condensed godly power and comprehended the precepts. This meant that none of them were weaker than Battle Saint Rider, at least not by much. It's dangerous here. There will be a hunting operation soon. Retreat to the back and do not approach this place. Sword Saint Snowheart said calmly. Thank you, Sword Saint Snowheart, for saving us. Let's go. Radiant Star Sword Saint and Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint cupped their fists and hurriedly left. Yi Chen also thanked them and followed behind. Chapter 1472. The Twilight Plane was too dangerous for Yi Chen and the other two. The three of them decided that they would never come back to the Twilight Plane before they condensed their divine power. Time passed quickly. It had been 2 million years since Yi Chen came to the Heaven Realm. Dugu and the others had mostly come to the Heaven Realm. Those who didn't had either died of old age, died in battle, or died in the chaotic battlefield. During this time, Murong Qingqing and Su Jing had both become beginner demigods. From now on, their lifespans exceeded 100 million years. During this time, Yi Chen had comprehended the 300th and 400th beginner divine skill. His strength had increased to the next level and he had passed the 18th floor of the Sword God Tower. However, the one who improved the most was the Radiant Star Sword Saint. Tens of thousands of years ago, the Radiant Star Sword Saint had condensed the Sword of Soul. He had been refining his divine power for the past tens of thousands of years. The last time he came out, he had actually reached the 25th floor of the Sword God Tower. One should know that the higher one went, the more difficult it would be. From now on, the Radiant Star Sword Saint is no longer on the same level as us. The Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint sighed. Yes. Yi Chen nodded. Almost all the battle sages of Overgod forces had comprehended the laws. Therefore, whether or not they condensed their divine power was the dividing line between the strong and the weak. Without condensing their divine power, it didn't matter if they were beginner battle sages or advanced battle sages, they were all weak. Once they condensed their divine power, even if they were beginner battle sages, they were still strong. Before condensing his godly power, Radiant Star Sword Saint was only a bit stronger than them. But after condensing his godly power, Radiant Star Sword Saint would only need a light sword strike to kill them. Yi Chen estimated that the current Radiant Star Sword Saint was a lot stronger than Battle Saint Ride. After all, Radiant Star Sword Saint had comprehended Starlight Law, which was a powerful law second only to peak laws. We need to work hard too. We need to condense the Sword of Soul and refine our divine power as soon as possible. The Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint clenched his fist. Those who had comprehended the laws of nature and were able to refine divine energy were powerful demigods. Among Overgod forces, the majority of high-rank battle saints were powerful demigods. The majority of high-rank sword saints in Sword God Palace were also powerful demigods. Intermediate-rank battle saints and sword saints were much rarer. Only 1 out of 10 could become a powerful demigod. Normally, only the elites could refine divine energy at the intermediate rank and become a powerful demigod. As for Ultimate Battle Sage, that was an even higher level, so he couldn't think about it for now. I will. Yi Chen felt that he had already touched the threshold of the Sword of the Soul and was only 1 step away. As usual, Yi Chen would head to Sword Heart Island to look at the word after the power of the word dissipated. Yi Chen had been in the heaven realm for 1,500,000 years. The radiant Star Sword Sage arrived at Green Lotus Island, laughing heartily. Yi Chen and Dan Yun Sword Saint were there, drinking and chatting. Bright Star Sword Saint, have you already converted all of your power into godly power? Yi Chen asked. Bright Star Sword Saint picked up a cup of wine and gulped it down. Not bad. After spending several 100,000 years, I've finally converted all of my power into godly power. Godly power was the fusion of all of one's power, which was why it was so powerful. Congratulations. Yi Chen and Dan Yun Sword Saint hurriedly toasted Bright Star Sword Saint. Although he wasn't on the same level as Yi Chen and Dan Yun Sword Saint, Bright Star Sword Saint didn't put on airs and said, "You guys have to work hard too. Once you condense the Sword of the Soul, you'll be able to comprehend divine skills very quickly, and your comprehension of laws will also increase very quickly. Without reaching this level, you won't know how wonderful it is. We've known this for a long time. Unfortunately, condensing the Sword of the Soul isn't that easy." Dan Yun Sword Saint smiled bitterly. "I'm preparing to go to the Twilight Plane again to see if I can get some divine stones to upgrade my Sky Saint artifact. It's a pity that I can't go with you guys." Bright Star Sword Saint was very confident in his own strength. At his level, unless it was an ultimate battle sage, even if his opponent was stronger than him, it would still be very difficult to kill him. "Be careful." "Yes, don't be careless. Don't worry. I won't be so unlucky as to meet an enemy ultimate battle sage." Sword Heart Island. Yi Chen didn't know how many times he had come to Sword Heart Island. Sometimes he went alone, and sometimes he came with Dan Yun Sword Saint. As he observed the word, time passed by bit by bit. Sword Heart Island contained the powerful power of the word. Time obviously slowed down a lot. 100 years inside was longer than 10,000 years outside. Unknowingly, Yi Chen's body started to emit a faint heart force. Although this heart force was faint and faintly discernible, it was extremely sharp. Immediately after, the word in Yi Chen's eyes started to change. First, he practiced countless divine-level sword arts. In the blink of an eye, more than 1,000 primary divine-level sword arts were all practiced. The speed was so fast that it made people's hair stand on end. Yi Chen couldn't react at all. His sea of soul was surging. In another blink of an eye, more than 50 intermediate divine-level sword arts were also practiced, followed by 3 advanced divine-level sword arts. After 3 blinks of an eye, the word, sword, turned into a figure that was sitting cross-legged. This figure was blurry, but the power it gave off caused the world to fall silent. Yi Chen had a feeling that this was the image of the sword god. Soul Sword. Someone has created a soul sword. Sword Heart Island became lively. Many sword saints looked at the place where the heart force waves were extremely intense. There, an illusory divine sword was being born. In the center of the illusory divine sword was a human figure. Is this the spirit sword? At this moment, Yi Chen was in a mysterious realm. He felt that he was omnipotent and that there was nothing that could stump him. He felt that he was incomparably strong. This strength was not external but internal. Apart from that, his extremely powerful heart allowed him to have absolute control over his various powers. This was probably the key to refining divine power and becoming a powerful demigod. I've finally come to this step. Yi Chen was filled with anticipation. After the Radiant Star Sword Saint refined his divine power, his strength would become unbelievably strong. Yi Chen himself had comprehended the complementary laws of nature and the 5 elements. He wondered how strong he would become after he refined his divine power. Other than that, Yi Chen was more concerned about the fact that he had 3 Supreme Sword Intents. Could it be that the 3 Supreme Sword Intents would all be integrated into his divine power? Divine power was the fusion of all powers, and sword intents were included. There's no rush. Yi Chen was familiarizing himself with the spirit sword. My spirit sword is blue in color. Gradually, the realm of the spirit sword stabilized, and Yi Chen discovered that his spirit sword was blue in color. The spirit sword was also the light of the soul. On the surface, the light of the soul referred to the light emitted from one's heart. Since it was the light emitted from one's heart, it would naturally have a color. The color varied from person to person. For people with a dark heart, the light of the soul would also be dark. For people with a bright heart, the light of the soul would also be bright. It reflected the nature of a person's heart. Yi Chen's spirit sword was blue in color. This color was on the cold side but very pure. It was in line with Yi Chen's nature. He was cold but very righteous. Chapter 1473. After leaving Sword Heart Island, Yi Chen immediately went into seclusion. He needed time to refine divine power. This was a huge project. Under the control of the Sword of Spirit, Yi Chen gathered all the power in his body to his heart. The heart was the center of divine power and also the place where divine power was produced. After all, the Sword of Spirit was also born from the heart. It was as if all the streams had returned to the origin. All the power gathered. First was the inextinguishable power of the spirit body, followed by the sword energy and qi, then the sword domain and sword intent. Apart from the laws, all of Yi Chen's power gathered at his heart. The whole heart gave off a colorful light, jumping and vibrating. Fortunately, it was protected by the Sword of Spirit, so it wouldn't explode. Fuse. The existence of the Sword of Spirit allowed Yi Chen to control so many powers with ease. Taking a deep breath, Yi Chen started to fuse the powers and refine divine power. Strand by strand. Refining divine power was very slow. If Yi Chen's original power was the vast ocean, then the process of refining divine power was like drawing seawater into a river. The river seemed wide, but compared to the ocean, it was not worth mentioning. No wonder the Radiant Star Sword Saint had spent hundreds of thousands of years to convert all the power in his body into divine power. However, what excited Yi Chen was that the 3 supreme sword intents were all fused and converted into divine power. This meant that Yi Chen's divine power had 2 more types of power than others. Let's see how powerful the divine power is. 100 years later, the divine power in Yi Chen's body began to take shape. It was a blue power, very vast and pure. He flicked his finger, and a blue finger force flew out. Boom! Terrifying ripples appeared in the sky. Time and space were distorted. The entire Sword God Palace was enveloped by a formless power. Green Lotus Island was the same. In the past, when Yi Chen used his full power, he couldn't even cause the formless power to move. Now, with a flick of his finger, he had such power. One could imagine how big the difference was. Amazing! Just the divine power alone is already stronger than my previous attack. If I used the divine skill, Yi Chen couldn't estimate his own power anymore. He had to challenge the Sword God Pagoda to find out. Green Lotus Sword Saint, you've already condensed the Sword of Spirit? One day, Sword Saint Dan Yun came to Green Lotus Island. He had just returned from his mission and learned that Yi Chen had condensed the Sword of Soul, so he immediately rushed over. Not bad. Yi Chen nodded and called Sword Saint Dan Yun over. Congratulations, I wonder when I will be able to reach this step. Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint was incomparably envious. He had become a mid-grade Sword Saint a step earlier than Yi Chen, but he didn't expect Yi Chen to surpass him. I was lucky. Condensing the Sword of Spirit was not something that one could control. When the time was right, it was naturally done. From now on, you are also a powerhouse, and you are even stronger than the Radiant Star Sword Saint. I don't think anyone below the Ultimate Battle Saint level can kill you. Sword Saint Dan Yun knew Yi Chen very well. Not only did Yi Chen comprehend the complementary laws of 5 elements, but he also had the 3 supreme sword intents. His foundation was much better than the Radiant Star Sword Saints. Excluding the Ultimate Battle Saints, if the Radiant Star Sword Saint was considered ordinary, then Yi Chen was definitely in the upper tier. Although he wasn't at the peak, at least the peak wouldn't be able to kill him easily. Another 100,000 years passed. Yi Chen had already transformed 1/3 of his divine power. The divine power in his body was surging like the sea. Just like what the Radiant Star Sword Saint had said, after condensing the Sword of Spirit, the speed at which one's law level increased was at least 100 times faster. In 100,000 years, The speed at which one's law level increased was much faster than before. Sword God Pagoda. Yichen started from the 19th floor, the 20th floor, the 21st floor, the 22nd floor, the 23rd floor, the 24th floor. Yichen effortlessly passed the 24th floor. This floor was the level of the Radiance Star Sword Saint. The 25th floor, the 26th floor, the 27th floor. When he reached the 28th floor, Yichen finally stopped. The 32nd floor and above is the level of the Ultimate Sword Saint. I'm still 5 floors away from the Ultimate Sword Saint. These 5 floors were not to be underestimated. Every floor was extremely difficult to pass. The reason why Ultimate Battle Saints were called Ultimate Battle Saints was because not only did they complement each other, but their divine power was also quite perfect. However, Yichen's divine power was not perfect. His sword origin, sword domain, and sword intent were all not perfect. Thus, the divine power formed from their fusion was naturally not perfect. Reaching the 28th floor, which was the same as passing the 27th floor, rewarded quite a lot of contribution points. Passing the 19th floor rewarded 26 million contribution points. Passing the 20th floor rewarded 52 million contribution points. Passing the 21st floor, 100 million. Passing the 22nd floor, 200 million. Passing the 23rd floor, 400 million. Passing the 24th floor, 800 million. Passing the 25th floor, 6 billion. Passing the 26th floor, 2 billion. Passing the 27th floor, 4 billion. A total of 8 billion contribution points. Another 400,000 years passed. Yichen had been in the heaven realm for 2 million years. Yichen had already converted all his power into divine power and comprehended the 500th primary godly skill, Shattering Heart Sword. In 5 million years, Yichen comprehended the 600th and 700th primary godly skill. In the 300th year, he comprehended the 800th primary godly skill. It's getting hard. Yichen faintly felt that it was getting harder to comprehend primary godly skills. The higher the level, the harder it was to comprehend. Although his comprehension ability had increased a lot after condensing the Sword of Soul, sometimes a high comprehension ability was not as useful as a deep foundation. For example, if Yichen was given a middle-level godly skill, Yichen would not be able to comprehend it. This required an incomparably deep foundation. Sword Saint Snowheart comprehended more than 200 primary godly skills not because he had nothing better to do, but to build his own foundation. In 8 million years, Sword Saint Scarlet Cloud also condensed the Sword of Soul. The Radiant Star Sword Saint and Yichen's existence had more or less stimulated him. Now, he had converted more than half of his divine power. He had even met up with Yichen some time ago, so he was in a very good mood. I have to slowly build my foundation. Good preparation is the key to success. The eruption of power exhausted Yichen's potential. Yichen did not expect to achieve much in just a few million years. Those ultimate sword saints had all spent tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of years to cultivate and accumulate. If a primary demigod could live for more than 100 million years, a powerful demigod who had condensed divine power could be said to have eternal life. They could live for at least 10 billion years. They had enough time to accumulate. After challenging the Sword God Pagoda, Yichen successfully passed the 28th level and obtained 8 billion contribution points. He was only 4 levels away from becoming an ultimate sword saint. Although the contribution points were a lot, he knew that it was still not enough to exchange for the beginner sword Dao pattern. It should be known that the 1000th beginner sword Dao pattern required 100 million contribution points, and exchanging for 1/5 of a beginner sword Dao pattern would require an astronomical amount of contribution points. Tens of billions of contribution points were nothing to him. Hence, Yichen decided to head to the Twilight Plains again to search for divine stones and hunt for battle sages of the Divine Union. Chapter 1474. Boom boom boom. On the Twilight Plain, the sound waves shook the sky and the ground cracked. 2 figures kept clashing, exchanging thousands of blows in an instant. Every time they clashed, a chaotic light would appear. One of the black figures was a battle sage demon with 2 horns on his head. His aura was very similar to the first demon ancestor, as if they came from the same source. The blue figure was Yi Chen. You have the bloodline of the great demon ancestor? During the battle, Yi Chen still had the energy to speak. The demon sneered, "That's right. In our demon god palace, everyone has the bloodline of the great demon ancestor. Our bloodline is the noblest, and I, demon saint, come from the powerful demon river universe." It wasn't only the black-yellow universe that had the bloodline of the great demon ancestor. Many universes had the bloodline of the great demon ancestor. I see. Yi Chen understood. In the black-yellow universe, the bloodline of the great demon ancestor was indeed a very powerful bloodline. However, in the demon god palace of the heaven realm, the bloodline of the great demon ancestor was only the most basic quality. If the first demon ancestor came to the heaven realm, he should have joined the demon god palace. This sky demon saint was very powerful. He was a high-level battle saint himself, and he had comprehended the darkness law and wind law. His realm was very high, much higher than even Sweet Dew Sword Saint. His divine power was even more frightening. His will and domain seemed to have reached perfection, transforming into divine power that was not inferior to Yi Chen's divine power. Most importantly, he had comprehended a mid-level divine skill. Fortunately, this mid-level divine skill was not perfected yet. Otherwise, Yi Chen would not be his opponent. The two fought for a day and a night, but there was still no winner. Demon Saint's advantage was that he had cultivated for a long time. Yi Chen's advantage was that he had comprehended the complementary 5 elements. Their advantages cancelled each other out. Demon Saint, I hope to see you again next time. Yi Chen did not want to fight anymore. After millions of years, he had accumulated a lot of power of the 5 elements. However, he did not want to waste it on a battle that he could not win. Don't go. Demon Saint chased after him. Unfortunately, Yi Chen's speed was much faster than his opponent. In a short while, he had left his opponent far behind. There were battles everywhere on the Twilight Plains. There were one-on-one fights, group fights, and even small-scale battles between gods. Everywhere was filled with the smoke of battle. 100,000 years had passed, and Yi Chen's battle achievements were bountiful. He had killed over 100 enemy intermediate battle saints and 7 advanced battle saints, earning over 10 billion contribution points. On this day, Yi Chen discovered a god's stone pit. The reason why he discovered it was because when he was fighting against an enemy advanced level battle saint, the aftermath of the battle had lifted up the ground and exposed the god's stone pit. With a burst of strength, Yi Chen killed his opponent and occupied the god's stone pit for himself. 11,000 parangons. A smile appeared on Yi Chen's face. This trip to the Twilight Plains had been worth it. Not only had he obtained tens of billions of contribution points, but he had also obtained so many divine stones. Compared to the former, the latter was clearly more valuable. Before coming to the Twilight Plains, Yi Chen had exchanged for a total of 10,000 9-star Earth Saint swords. A single 9-star Earth Saint sword required more than 5,000 contribution points, so 10,000 swords were only around 50 million. This was nothing to the current Yi Chen. After choosing 1,000 9-star Earth Saint swords, Yi Chen began to fuse them with the parangons. The result was not bad. After spending around 9,000 parangons, Yi Chen obtained 15 3-star Heaven Saint swords. Originally, he had 3 swords, but now, he had a total of 18 swords. After spending another 300 parangons, he obtained 3 more 4-star Heaven Saint swords. Now, with the addition of the Firmament sword, Yi Chen had 4 4-star Heaven Saint swords. He was left with around 2,000 parangons. Hopefully, my luck will be better. Yi Chen took a deep breath and tried to fuse the parangons with the Firmament sword. Boom! The Firmament sword suddenly turned transparent, and an intense light burst forth. In the next moment, it exploded with a loud bang. The terrifying shockwave sent Yi Chen flying. Fortunately, Yi Chen's current strength was not the same as before. Under the protection of the divine force, he didn't suffer any injuries. What a pity! Yi Chen felt very regretful. The firmament sword had accompanied him for millions of years, and his feelings for it were rather deep. Now, it had exploded just like that, and not even a fragment could be found. Since even the firmament sword was gone, Yichen didn't feel any pity for the 3 remaining 4-star Heaven Saint swords. He didn't hesitate to fuse the parangons with the parangons. Boom! The second 4-star Heaven Saint sword exploded. Then it was the 3rd sword. It was unknown if the quality of this 4-star Heaven Saint sword was indeed very good, surpassing the firmament sword. The moment the parangons fused with the parangons, the sword emitted an astonishing radiance. This radiance wasn't the intense light of an explosion, but an extremely dazzling radiance. The power of laws interweaved with each other, and it was extremely hair-raising. No wonder. It actually contains the fragments of the 5 laws of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. Yichen was very surprised. He didn't pay much attention to this sword before, but now that he looked deeper into it, he realized that the source of this sword contained the fragments of the 5 laws of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. It was rather perfect and formed a cycle. Yichen didn't know that demigods and Heaven Saint weapons were divided into different levels. Demigods who comprehended the complementary laws were elites among demigods. Heaven Saint weapons that contained the complementary laws were elite Heaven Saint weapons. I'll call you 5-element sword. Since it contained the fragments of the 5 laws of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth, it was much easier to give it a name. In for a penny, in for a pound. Yichen planned to upgrade the 5-element sword to the 6-star grade. With the quality of the 5-element sword, the success rate was very high. Yichen forcefully spat out a mouthful of turbid air and continued to fuse. The result made Yichen pleasantly surprised. The 5-element sword successfully upgraded to the 6-star grade. The process was rather smooth. What about the 7-star? Yichen felt that it was highly possible. A terrifying 5-colored light burst out, and the laws of the 5 elements intertwined. In Yichen's eyes, the 5-element sword suddenly rose to the 7-star grade. It was rather heavy in his hand, and it felt like he could split a primordial divine mountain in half. Break! With a low roar, Yichen slashed the ground in front of him. Kacha! A blue-colored sword light burst out, and a pitch-black hole appeared on the ground. The hole kept expanding and extended crazily, forming a small canyon. The hole that was closer to Yichen was narrow and deep, and the further away from Yichen, the shallower the hole was. However, the width of the hole had increased by 1,000 times. It should be comparable to an 8-star Heaven Saint treasure sword, or even a 9-star. Yichen's face revealed a joyful expression. Although the 5-element sword was a 7-star Heaven Saint treasure sword, it contained the fragments of the laws of the 5 elements. When combined with the laws of the 5 elements that Yichen had, the power it could display was very terrifying. It definitely surpassed the 7-star Heaven Saint treasure. After all, Yichen was also someone who had seen a 7-star Heaven Saint treasure sword. He had even seen a 9-star Heaven Saint treasure sword before. There were many sword saints in the Sword God Palace who had a 9-star Heaven Saint treasure sword. This is a pleasant surprise. After losing the firmament sword and obtaining the 5-element sword, Yichen didn't know whether he should be happy or worried. It should be both. Yichen estimated that his strength had increased by a small level. If he encountered the Sky Demon Saint again, he might not be able to do anything to him, but he could at least suppress him. Chapter 1475. Time passed by quickly. In the 3,600,000th year, Yichen had comprehended the first 50 elementary divine skills. In the 5 millionth year, Yichen had comprehended the first 100 elementary divine skills. In the 5,500,000th year, Yichen had comprehended the 1 millionth elementary divine skill. In the 6 millionth year, Yichen had comprehended the 1,100,000th elementary divine skill. In the 8 millionth year, Yichen had comprehended the first 150 elementary divine skills. In the 10 millionth year, Yichen had comprehended the first 200 elementary divine skills. In the 111 millionth year, Yichen had comprehended the 1,172nd elementary divine skill, Sword Heart. This elementary divine skill was the last of the elementary divine skills, and it was also the most powerful one. Next, I can try to comprehend a mid-grade divine skill. Even the weakest mid-grade divine skill was still a mid-grade divine skill. Its power was not something a low-grade divine skill could compare to. After all these years, Yi Chen had already passed the 29th level of the Sword God Pagoda. He was only 3 levels away from becoming an ultimate sword sage. If he could comprehend a mid-grade divine skill, he might be able to pass the 30th level of the Sword God Pagoda, and his power would increase greatly. Of course, he was able to pass the 29th level not only because he had comprehended the last elementary divine skill, Sword Heart. It was also because after countless years, Yi Chen's nomological realm had improved a lot. The 5-elemental nomological realm was already close to phenomenal success. Once it reached phenomenal success, he would only be a step away from perfection. Furthermore, as the 5-elemental nomological realm improved, Yi Chen discovered that the quality of the 5 elemental swords was also improving. The 5 elemental nomological fragments inside were gradually becoming stronger. As it turned out, Yi Chen often imbued the 5 elemental nomological laws into the 5 elemental swords, causing the 5 elemental swords to form a direct connection with Yi Chen. As Yi Chen's 5 elemental nomological realm improved, the quality of the 5 elemental swords would also improve. Sensing that the 5 elemental swords could be upgraded to the 8-star level, Yi Chen did not think too much and imbued 10 divine stones into it. In the end, the 5-element sword was successfully upgraded to 8 stars, and it was only 1 step away from becoming a 9-star Sky Saint artifact. In the 13 millionth year, Yi Chen had comprehended the first 250 primary godly skills. At this point, in terms of the number of primary godly skills that he had comprehended, Yi Chen was not inferior to Sword Saint Snowheart. Of course, Sword Saint Snowheart did not comprehend primary godly skills in order. Sword Saint Snowheart had also comprehended many of the lower-ranked primary godly skills. In the 150 million years, Yi Chen finally comprehended his first intermediate divine skill, the first intermediate divine skill, Thousand Eyes. Green Lotus Island. The Radiant Star Sword Sage, the Pill Cloud Sword Sage, the Sweet Dew Sword Sage, and the Shadowless Sword Sage had all arrived. They had already become good friends, often drinking, chatting, and sparring with each other. Green Lotus Sword Saint, I, the Shadowless Sword Saint, rarely admire people, but you are the one I admire. In just a short 10 million years, you have become the strongest amongst us, and even far surpassed us. I can't help but admire you. The Shadowless Sword Saint sighed with emotion. Hearing this, the Sweet Dew Sword Saint nodded. The Shadowless Sword Saint is right. There are 3 people in the Sword God Palace that I admire the most. One is the Idealistic Sword Saint, the second is the Peerless Sword Saint, and the third is you. In comparison, the Idealistic Sword Saint and the Peerless Sword Saint are unable to reach your level in 10 million years. Yi Chen's monstrous level was simply shocking. Comprehending divine skills was as easy as eating and drinking. Among intermediate sword saints, there were very few who had comprehended more than 30 primary godly skills. Among advanced sword saints, there were very few who had comprehended more than 100 primary godly skills. However, Yi Chen had comprehended nearly 300 primary godly skills. It was truly admirable. I think Green Lotus Sword Saint might be able to break the record of the Sword God Palace and become the ultimate sword saint in the shortest time possible. The Bright Star Sword Saint smiled. It's highly possible. The Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint nodded. Yi Chen smiled. Everyone, you're too kind. I merely put all my effort into it. There's nothing else. Yi Chen did not pretend to be modest. It was true that he rarely paid attention to things that were unrelated to him. His life was very simple, and that was to constantly work hard to become stronger. Although the 4 of them held him in high esteem, he himself was not very satisfied. This was because he did not pass the 30th level of the Sword God Pagoda even though he had comprehended the first intermediate godly skill, Thousand Eyes. The later levels of the Sword God Pagoda could be said to be abnormal. Passing each level was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. It did not mean that one would be able to smoothly pass through the levels with just a little bit of improvement. One had to improve tremendously and have a qualitative breakthrough. In the 16th million year, Yi Chen's sword domain broke through to the 9th level of perfection. The divine power it transformed into was even stronger. It was no longer inferior to the divine power of an ultimate sword saint. After all, ultimate sword saints did not have 3 supreme sword intents. As the sword domain broke through to the 9th level of perfection, Yi Chen successfully passed through the 30th level of the Sword God Pagoda. He was only 2 levels away from becoming an ultimate sword saint. In the 17th million year, Yi Chen comprehended the 5th intermediate godly skill, Flourish. In the 20th million year, a godly battle erupted between the sword god deity branches Beast God and the demonic god deity branches Demonic Beast God. In the myriad beast battlefield. This was an planar battlefield jointly opened up by the Beast God and the Demonic Beast God. The battlefield was vast and boundless. At this moment, there were tens of millions of battle sages fighting on the battlefield. Tens of thousands of battle sages were dying every moment. A godly battle was extremely tragic. Under normal circumstances, after a long and drawn-out godly battle, more than half of the battle sages on both sides would die. Hence, unless it was absolutely necessary, a godly battle would not break out easily. Once it did, it would be a battle to the death. As a member of the Beast God Valley, Su Jing naturally had to participate in the battle. In the past 20 million years, she had also improved greatly. Unfortunately, in the myriad beast battlefield, she was still an ordinary member. She could be killed at any time. Yi Chen also participated in this godly battle. He had to participate. Otherwise, it was very likely that Su Jing would die on the battlefield. Puff, puff, puff. It was as if 1,000 eyes blinked in the sky. Dozens of demonic beast mountain battle sages were killed. This was the first intermediate godly skill, 1,000 eyes. The moment 1,000 eyes appeared, it was as if the Grim Reaper had opened 1,000 eyes. It's the sword saint of the Sword God Palace. Everyone, follow me to kill him. Yi Chen's strength attracted countless attacks. The sword saint of the Sword God Palace was very famous in the heaven domain. In terms of combat strength, if the sword saint of the Sword God Palace claimed to be the second strongest, no one would dare to claim to be the first. Of course, this was under the condition that their foundations were similar. Otherwise, even Yi Chen would not be able to withstand an ultimate battle sage. Boom boom boom. At least 100 intermediate and advanced battle sages joined forces to attack Yi Chen. Flourish. The moment the 5-element sword appeared, the void seemed to have become a kaleidoscope. Everything was twisted, folded, and shattered. Blood dyed the sky red. Over 100 enemy battle sages had died. Sword Saint of the Sword God Palace, die for me. Right at this time, a huge hammer smashed over from afar. This hammer was only a few meters long and was connected to a chain. However, when the hammer smashed over 1,000 battle sages of the Beast God Valley were smashed into meat paste. The might of this hammer was so great that it was terrifying to the extreme. Ultimate Battle Sage. Yi Chen narrowed his eyes. This was the first time he faced an ultimate battle sage head-on. Everyone, retreat. Saying so, Yi Chen stood in front of them. Chapter 1476. Boom. A majestic wave of air came toward him, blowing Yi Chen's hair backward. The next moment, the hammer struck him like a meteor. With a clang, Yi Chen almost lost his grip on the 5-element sword. His body froze there as if struck by lightning. 1,000th of a second later, he was sent flying backward, spitting out a mouthful of blood. Ultimate battle saints were too strong. If not for Yi Chen's divine power, which was not inferior to an ordinary ultimate battle saint, this hammer strike could have taken Yi Chen's life. Even so, Yi Chen clearly sensed that his martial Yuan spirit was worn out. Although their divine powers were about the same, the opponent's comprehension of the laws was higher than Yi Chen's. It should be noted that the ultimate battle saint also comprehended the complementary laws. What? He only spat out a mouthful of blood. The nearby battle saints of Devil Beast Mountain were shocked. The giant hammer battle saint was an ultimate battle saint of Devil Beast Mountain. Although he was just an ordinary ultimate battle saint, an ultimate battle saint was still an ultimate battle saint. His divine power and comprehension of the laws had reached perfection. No one below the ultimate battle saint could stand a chance against him. His divine power is clearly not at perfection. Why is it so powerful? The giant hammer battle saint was a little puzzled. He was sure that Yi Chen's divine power was definitely not at perfection. This could not be hidden from him. However, its power was quite terrifying, especially its destructive power, which even surpassed his own divine power at perfection. Humph, let's see how many of my hammers you can block. The giant hammer battle saint swung his hammer at Yi Chen like a hot knife through butter. The hammer was like a meteor, and the hammer was like a divine mountain. It locked onto Yi Chen's figure from far away. It was extremely fierce. At this moment, a cold star pierced through the air. Clang! The hammer flew backward, out of the giant hammer battle saint's control. Giant hammer battle saint, your opponent is me. A clear and cold voice was heard. Yi Chen looked back and saw the cold star battle saint. The cold star battle saint was an ultimate battle saint of Beast God Valley. Count yourself lucky. The giant hammer battle saint glared at Yi Chen with a murderous look and clashed with the cold star battle saint. In the 22 million year, the War of the Gods continued. The Sword God Systems Barbarian God Stronghold and the Demon God Systems Yaksha God Systems Yaksha Cave also joined the War of Gods. In the 25 millionth year, the Giant Spiritual Gods Giant Spiritual Mountain and the Evil Gods Evil Spirit Palace also joined the War of Gods. The Sword God Divine Branch and the Demon God Divine Branch were at daggers drawn. Kill! 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 The battlefield had long since shifted from the Myriad Beast battlefield to the Sword Demon battlefield jointly opened by Sword God and Demon God. The Sword Fiend battlefield was a battlefield created by a sovereign, and not even the laws of primal chaos were able to invade it. 5 million years of battle had greatly benefited Yi Chen. Not only had he advanced from an intermediate sword saint to an advanced sword saint, but he had also managed to comprehend his 7th and 10th intermediate divine skills. Apart from this, his greatest gain was that his 5 elemental laws had reached the large success realm, and he was only a step away from perfection. The 5 elemental laws had reached the phenomenal stage, and the 5 elemental sword's quality had risen along with it. In the end, it had become a 9-star Heaven Saint artifact. At this point, unless it was a divine artifact, there was no other Heaven Saint artifact that was stronger than the 5 elemental sword. At most, it would be on par with it. In the meantime, Yi Chen had also gone back to attempt the Divine Sword Pagoda. His current result was the 31st level of the Divine Sword Pagoda, and he was only 1 level away from becoming an ultimate sword saint. In the 30 million year, the number of factions that joined the War of the Gods had reached 10. In the 35 million year, the number of factions that joined the War of the Gods had reached 16. In the Sword Demon battlefield, smoke filled the air, and corpses piled up like mountains. Clang, clang, clang. In a depression in the Sword Demon battlefield, an ultimate battle saint from the Yaksha Cave was suppressing Yi Chen. Every time they exchanged blows, Yi Chen would be sent flying thousands of meters away. In the 15 million years since the start of the War of the Gods, Yi Chen had faced ultimate battle saints many times. The most dangerous time was when he was almost killed by an ultimate battle saint from the Evil Spirit Palace. This ultimate battle saint from the Yaksha Cave was about as strong as the giant hammer battle saint. He was not very terrifying, but he was still an ultimate battle saint. As time passed, he would still be in great danger. This ultimate battle saint from the Yaksha Cave was called Battle Saint Yi. His weapon was a trident. Since he could not kill Yi Chen in a short period of time, he was extremely violent, and each of his attacks was more domineering than the last. After dozens of attacks, Yi Chen could not help but spit out a large mouthful of blood. His martial soul had dimmed a little. Back then, the giant hammer battle saint had made him spit out blood with a single attack. This time he was much better. Earth Tyrant Heavenly Star. Suddenly, Battle Saint Yi shot into the sky. In the next moment his body spun, and a terrifying rotational force enveloped Yi Chen. The ground around Yi Chen was swept up, forming a huge ball of earth. It was like a small star, and it wrapped around Yi Chen. This was Battle Saint Yi He's most powerful mid-grade divine technique. It was always effective against those weaker than him. Under this move, Yi Chen felt a strong sense of danger. It was as if countless tridents were stabbing at him from all directions. There was no way to block or dodge. Am I going to be heavily injured? Yi Chen frowned. His martial soul had been heavily injured, and it would take a long time to recover. Moreover, the divinity battle was in full swing, and he could not afford to rest. The strong sense of danger caused Yi Chen's many years of accumulation to erupt once more. In his soul sea, the three supreme sword souls vibrated wildly, resonating with each other. Buzz. Time seemed to slow down thousands of times. Yi Chen's eyes swirled with black, white, and gold. Boom! With a slash of his sword, the ball of earth was split in half, and Yi Chen escaped. Ha! Battle Saint Yi, he could not believe that his ultimate technique had been broken. It had to be known that this technique could only be broken by ultimate battle saints of the same level. This godly power? Sensing the change in Yi Chen's godly power, Battle Saint Yi he was bewildered. Yi Chen's godly power was too strong, even stronger than his own. How could he know that Yi Chen's three supreme sword souls had all broken through to the peak of the ninth order in this crisis? At this point, Yi Chen's godly power had surpassed that of an ordinary consummate divine force. Moreover, he had two more supreme sword intents than an ordinary consummate divine force. This completely negated Battle Saint Yi He's advantage of having a higher cultivation level. I don't believe it. Battle Saint Yi he once again charged at Yi Chen. Boom! The earth trembled, and a violent shockwave radiated in all directions. Battle Saint Yi he and Yi Chen were both sent flying. Both sides were evenly matched. Impossible! Battle Saint Yi he could not accept this reality, and he attacked Yi Chen again and again. Unfortunately, each time he failed, he could not do anything to Yi Chen. Yi Chen's current strength had already reached the level of an ordinary ultimate battle saint. Of course, Yi Chen estimated that he was still quite a bit weaker than an ordinary ultimate sword saint. This was because ultimate battle saints were formed from the light of the soul, while ultimate sword saints were formed from the sword of the soul. The latter was stronger and more offensive. The reason why Yi Chen was able to block out one attack from the giant hammer battle saint and dozens of attacks from the Yi He battle saint before was because he was a sword saint. Otherwise, if it were a battle saint with the same quality as him, they would not be able to block it out. The sword saints of the Sword God's Palace were invincible under the same conditions. One more step and my godly power will be perfect. Perfect divine power had to meet these conditions. The cultivation of an advanced sword saint, the inextinguishable power of a perfect spirit body, perfect sword intent, perfect sword domain, and so on. In short, all kinds of power had to be perfect, and the perfect divine power of an ultimate sword saint was a level higher than that of an ultimate battle saint. In terms of godly power, Yi Chen's current godly power should be similar to that of an ordinary ultimate sword saint. Unfortunately, he was lacking in other aspects. Against an ordinary ultimate battle saint, however, Yi Chen could use his godly power to make up for his lack of cultivation level. Chapter 1477. It had been 40 million years since Yi Chen had arrived in the heaven realm, and it had been 20 million years since the God War had erupted. The conflict between the Sword God Divine System and the Demon God Divine System had erupted, and the Sword God Palace's Sword Saints and Demon God Palace's Battle Saints had joined the God War. The Sword Demon battlefield could no longer withstand the endless destruction and was banished to the Twilight Plane by the law of primal chaos. The Twilight Plains became the battleground for the Sword God Pantheon and the Demon God Pantheon. The battle saints of the other main god pantheons did not step into the Twilight Plains as they did not want to get involved in the God War. That kind of situation was not something that a single force could contend against, unless an all-out God War broke out in the heaven realm. Kill them all? The Sword God Palace is invincible. The Demon God Palace is invincible. On the Twilight Plains, hundreds of millions of battle saints were engaged in a fierce battle. Among them, The Sword God's Palace and the Demon God's Palace had the fewest people, but their battle prowess was the strongest. This was especially true for the Sword God's Palace. They only had a few million sword saints, but wherever they went, they were like a hot knife through butter. This was especially true for the group of sword saints led by the ultimate sword saint. They were like monsters, rampaging and unstoppable. Battle sages were not made of steel. Even if they were made of steel, there would still be a day when they would rust and collapse. Therefore, after a long period of time, any battle sage had the right to apply for a chance to rest. Taking advantage of the time to rest, Yichen worked hard to comprehend the divine skills. As long as he could comprehend the divine skills, he would be able to refine them through killing and perfecting them. It would be faster and more direct than usual. Right now, Yichen had already comprehended 600 beginner-level god skills and 7 intermediate-level god skills. He was ranked in the middle of the ultimate sword saints and was even better than Sword Saint Snowheart and other ultimate sword saints. Of course, in terms of strength, Yichen was still the weakest ultimate sword saint. Ultimate sword saints were simply too strong. Other than Yichen, even the most ordinary ultimate sword saint was equivalent to an intermediate ultimate battle saint from a true god faction. Ordinary ultimate battle sages like the Giant Hammer Battle Sage and the Nightwell Battle Sage were no match for an ordinary ultimate sword sage. The 8th mid-level godly skill. On this day, Yichen comprehended another mid-level godly skill, Sword Essence. This was the 21st mid-level godly skill. It was also the 8th intermediate godly skill that Yichen had comprehended. Twilight Plains. Yichen met up with the Sword Saint of Sword God Palace. Su Jing and Murong Qingqing were still in Beast God Valley and Ancient Fragrant Castle. They were beginner battle saints, so they had more time to rest and strengthen themselves. On the battlefield, beginner battle saints were just cannon fodder. There was not much difference if they were present or not, so their rest time was relatively more relaxed. Green Lotus Sword Saint. The Sweet Dew Sword Saint, the Shadowless Sword Saint, the Radiant Star Sword Saint, and the Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint approached. "How's the situation?" Yichen asked. The Shadowless Sword Saint frowned. The situation isn't very optimistic. Although the sword saints of our Sword God Palace are unparalleled, the battle saints of Demon Celestial Palace can't be underestimated, especially when they obtained a bloodline divine skill that allows them to combine their battle saints in pairs, up to 6. Furthermore, the Demon Celestial Palace has several times more members than us. Bloodline skill? Yichen looked ahead. On the vast plains, divine power and laws intertwined. Yichen easily found the battle saints of Demon Celestial Palace. The battle saints of Demon Celestial Palace were battle saints of main god forces after all. Their strength was higher than battle saints of true god forces, second only to the sword saint of Sword God Palace. Because they both had the bloodline of Great Demon King, the aura of the battle saints of Demon Celestial Palace was very similar. Yichen immediately saw 2 battle saints fusing into one, becoming a gigantic unfamiliar battle saint. This is the bloodline divine skill? Yichen didn't understand. Sweet Dew Sword Saint explained, not all battle saints of Demon Celestial Palace can fuse together. There seems to be some conditions that need to be met. Unfortunately, the God Wars happened too quickly. We didn't get any information about this, so we don't know what the key to the bloodline divine skill is. Plus, only Demon Celestial Palace can use the bloodline divine skill. Even if we know the secret, we probably can't do anything about it. Bright Star Sword Saint and Red Cloud Sword Saint nodded. This should be the work of the demon god. Yichen guessed in his heart. Demon Celestial Palace was different from other true god forces or main god forces. The members of Demon Celestial Palace all had the bloodline of the Great Demon King. This was very ridiculous. If it was just an ordinary bloodline, then it wouldn't be a big deal. However, the Great Demon King bloodline was the pinnacle of bloodlines. No one knew how the demon god created this bloodline. Perhaps he discovered some secret in the primal chaos and created the Great Demon King bloodline. Now, he even researched a bloodline divine skill based on the Great Demon King bloodline. In front of them, the sky was filled with multicolored light. It was like the rising sun, but also like the setting sun. This was godly power. The godly power that belonged to the Dawn Spirit Sword Saint. The Dawn Spirit Sword Saint was one of the Sword God Palace's ultimate sword saints. She was very powerful and had already reached the 34th floor of the Sword God Pagoda. Her godly power was fused with countless spirit clouds and was called the Dawn Spirit Godly Power. The Dawn Spirit Sword Saint's opponent was a bloodline divine warrior formed by the fusion of 1 demon Celestial Palace's ultimate battle saint and 5 demon Celestial Palace's advanced battle saints. The bloodline divine warrior was extremely powerful and had a huge body. Even their heavenly saint weapons had fused together, turning into a giant mace that seemed to be formed from a living creature. The mace had a huge mouth that could spit out a terrifying tongue. In a moment of carelessness, the Dawn Spirit Sword Saint's shoulder was pierced by the tongue in the mace's huge mouth. Her entire body was flung away and smashed into the bodies of 3 sword saints. These 3 advanced sword saints did not even have the chance to make a sound before they exploded on the spot. Ha! Come on! Who will fight me? The bloodline divine warrior swept the mace with a ferocious expression. He was invincible, and the sword saints in his path were all turned into meat paste. In the sky outside the twilight plane, the 7 suns were especially dazzling. When did that demon god create a bloodline divine skill based on the great demon king's bloodline? What a surprise! Above the sun of destruction, a voice quietly whispered. The faint tone contained the taste of destruction. I knew that demon god was not so simple. He must have discovered something amazing while roaming the primal chaos. I'm afraid that Sword God is going to lose this time. Sword God has traveled the universe unhindered. His origins are unknown. Perhaps he had already anticipated this situation. That's why he has not shown himself for countless years. He should be looking for an opportunity. On the Sun of Chaos, an old man with an ancient face sat cross-legged. Beside him were 2 children. Teacher, is Sword God going to lose? The child on the left mustered up his courage and asked. The old man neither shook his head nor nodded. Everything is destined. There is no need to speculate. Let's just keep watching. The Dawn Spirit Sword Saint was about to stand up and fight again when a hand pressed her down. Go find another opponent. Leave him to me. The voice was gentle, making one feel unprecedentedly relaxed. At the same time, one's confidence was restored. Limitless Sword Saint. The Dawn Spirit Sword Saint nodded and turned to leave. This bloodline divine warrior charged toward Limitless Sword Saint. With a gentle smile on his face, Limitless Sword Saint pointed out with a finger. Like a leaking balloon, the bloodline divine warrior rapidly shriveled and then exploded into ashes. Limitless Sword Saint, one of the 2 strongest ultimate sword saints of Sword God Palace. Chapter 1478. The Peerless Sword Sage is here. Great. With the Peerless Sword Sage here, the bloodline battle sages of the Demon God Palace are nothing. The appearance of the Peerless Sword Sage boosted the confidence of the sword sages of the Sword God Palace. A long time ago, the idealistic sword sage and the peerless sword sage had become the symbols of the Sword God Palace. The idealistic sword sage was elusive and no one knew who he was. Legend had it that the idealistic sword sage could transform into any sword sage. He could transform into an ultimate sword sage or an ordinary sword sage. If he didn't want to be exposed, no one could find him. Of course, the main gods and true gods were exceptions. Excluding the mysterious idealistic sword sage, the peerless sword sage was undoubtedly the backbone of the Sword God Palace. With him around, everything could be solved. In the past divine wars, the peerless sword sage had led the sword sages of the Sword God Palace to defeat the Demon God Palace several times. Although the bloodline battle sages were strong, they were definitely no match for the peerless sword sage. In a short time, the peerless sword sage had killed 7 or 8 bloodline battle sages. How can he be so strong? While fighting, Yichen was observing Sword Saint's movements. Seeing this, he couldn't help but feel astonished. If the peerless sword sage had gone all out, it would have been fine. However, the peerless sword sage was just strolling around leisurely. When he encountered a bloodline battle sage, the other party would immediately explode. The Deuce sword sage explained, "The peerless sword sage is the second sword sage in the Sword God Palace besides the idealistic sword sage to comprehend a high-level divine skill. There are only 3 high-level divine skills in the Sword God Palace. Comprehending any one of them is enough to be invincible." It is said that the peerless sword sage comprehended the first high-level sword Dao skill, Unhindered Sword Heart. Unhindered Sword Heart? Yichen savored this term. Usually, Unhindered Sword Chi, Unhindered Saber Chi, and Unhindered Battle Strength represented tyrannical strength. The Unhindered Sword Heart was more reserved. It wasn't just about strength, but also a strong heart. A strong heart would usually lead to strong strength. This was strength coming from within. A true sword sage should have an unhindered sword heart. Yichen thought so. Peerless sword sage, we haven't fought for more than 1 billion years. Let me see how strong you are. In the distance, a silhouette shot over. It was a demon god palace ultimate battle saint with a pair of dragon wings and a body covered in scales. Demon Sage Dragon Scale. The limitless sword saint looked over. The Dragon Scale Demon Sage was the #1 ultimate battle sage of the Demon God Palace. His status was equivalent to the idealistic sword sage of the Sword God Palace. Of course, in terms of strength, the Dragon Scale Demon Sage was no match for the idealistic sword sage. He was also slightly weaker than the peerless sword sage. It's the Dragon Scale Demon Sage. The members of the Sword God Palace paled slightly. Although they had the unparalleled sword sage to deal with the Dragon Scale battle sage, the demonic sage was still a godlike existence to them. Boom! As soon as limitless sword saint and Dragon Scale Demon Saint clashed, they immediately caused a huge explosion. The violent shockwave blew away all the sword saints and battle sages within 100 miles. Some sword saints and battle sages were turned into ashes in the air. So powerful! Yichen and the others were also affected. Fortunately, they were far away and were only sent flying. The Dragon Scale Demon Sage's attack was majestic and magnificent. Those who were weak would be weakened by a level before they even started fighting. On the other hand, the unparalleled sword sage remained calm. However, a sword appeared in his hand. When he swung the sword chi was calm, but its power was not weak at all. The crisscrossing sword heart was not a simple move. It was more like an inner strength. Wherever the two went, ravines were created and the sound waves shook the sky. Fortunately, the Dragon Scale Demon Sage seems to be unable to use his bloodline skill and fuse with the other Demon God Palace battle sages to form a bloodline battle sage. The sword saint of the Sword God Palace who was watching the battle heaved a sigh of relief. "Ha, we meet again. Die." Just as Yichen was paying attention to the battle between the unparalleled sword sage and the Dragon Scale Demon Sage, a figure pounced over. It was the Demon God Palace's Sky Demon Sage. After 20 million years, the Sky Demon Sage's strength had improved a lot. Back then, he was only at the divine power perfection realm and did not comprehend the complementary nomological laws. What he comprehended were the dark laws and the wind laws. After 20 million years, the Sky Demon Sage comprehended the light laws, which combined with the dark laws to form the complementary laws of light and darkness. His strength had increased by more than 100 or even 1,000 times. Seeing Yichen on the battlefield, the Sky Demon Sage laughed wildly in his heart. In his opinion, after 20 million years, no matter how much Yichen had improved, he would not be as strong as him. This time, it was time for him to die. "Oh, it seems like you are very confident." Yichen did not waste time and started to fight with the Sky Demon Sage. "I see." Yichen roughly estimated the Sky Demon Sage's strength. Indeed, he was many times stronger than he was in the past. Unfortunately, things were different now. Yichen had improved a lot. The Sky Demon Sage was extremely shocked that he could not suppress Yichen. "How is this possible? I think you are the one who will die." Yichen no longer suppressed his strength and attacked the Sky Demon Sage with all his might. In terms of divine power, Yi Chen's divine power was at the level of an ordinary ultimate sword saint, while the Sky Demon Sage's divine power was at the level of an ordinary ultimate battle saint. In terms of laws, although the Sky Demon Sage comprehended the light laws, it was a pity that the light laws had not reached the great accomplishment realm. When combined with the darkness laws, it was not truly perfect and could not compare to Yi Chen's great accomplishment 5 elements laws. In terms of divine skills, Yi Chen had already comprehended the 21st mid-level divine skill, the Sword Essence, while the Sky Demon Sage seemed to have only comprehended 3 or 4 mid-level divine skills. Regardless of which aspect, Yi Chen had surpassed the Sky Demon Sage. As soon as the Sword Essence appeared, a wide sword chi appeared. With a swoosh, it brushed past the Sky Demon Sage's body. The Sky Demon Sage was immediately turned into a bloody mist. Now, it was difficult for Yi Chen to find a match for anyone below the ultimate battle saint realm. Originally, everyone thought that the divine war would continue for tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of years. Unexpectedly, after a short few hundred years, the divine war came to an abrupt end. Both sides received divine decrees from the true gods to stop the divine war. Green Lotus Island. Normally, a divine war is stopped in preparation for the ultimate war. The Sweet Dew Sword Saint looked pensive. Ultimate war? Yi Chen looked over. The Sweet Dew Sword Saint explained, "Our Sword God Divine System and Demon God Divine System have experienced countless battles between gods over the countless years, but there aren't many ultimate battles. In every ultimate battle, not only will countless battle sages fall, even true gods will participate in the battle. Occasionally, true gods will also fall. Before the ultimate battle arrives, we must increase our strength with all our might. Otherwise, when the ultimate battle begins, no one will be able to guarantee their own safety. Only by becoming stronger will we have a higher chance of survival." "What about the core gods?" Yi Chen asked. The Shadowless Sword Saint frowned and said, "Normally, core gods will not participate in the battle because the battle between core gods is too terrifying. Of course, core gods may fight in the chaos outside the heaven realm, but we do not know." Chapter 1479. Time passed quickly. It had been 60 million years since Yi Chen came to the heaven realm. The War of Gods had already ended 20 million years ago. Most people who didn't know the inside story thought that there would be no more War of Gods. They gradually forgot about the tragic battle 20 million years ago. During these 20 million years, Yi Chen never stopped improving. He improved faster and faster. In these 20 million years, Yi Chen had comprehended 800 low-grade skills and 20 mid-grade skills. There was a rumor in the Sword God Palace that if one wanted to comprehend an advanced divine skill, they had to comprehend all the basic and intermediate divine skills. Only then would they have a chance to comprehend an advanced divine skill. The Idealistic Sword Saint and the Limitless Sword Saint were one of the representatives. The two of them had comprehended all the basic and intermediate divine skills long ago. Yi Chen was still very far away from this goal, thousands of miles away from it. In these 80 million years, he had comprehended 1,000 low-grade skills and 30 mid-grade skills. In 82 million years, Yi Chen's 5 elemental laws finally reached perfection. Is this the perfection of the complementary laws? In his Soul Sea, the 5 laws of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth were perfect without any flaws. A 5-colored whirlpool appeared between the 5 laws. The speed at which the laws of 5 were produced increased by 100 times. As the laws of 5 reached perfection, Yi Chen felt that the restrictions of the heaven realm's primal chaos laws on him had lessened. If I can achieve God laws, the primal chaos laws shouldn't restrict me anymore. Instead, I can resist the primal chaos laws to a certain extent. When I become an overgod, I can even make the primal chaos laws retreat. Overgods were the kings of true gods. Ordinary true gods were still in great danger when roaming the primal chaos. Only overgods rarely encountered danger. Overgods could only be trapped and couldn't be killed. Even the supreme overgod, the chaos overgod, and the primal chaos laws could not kill an overgod. Of course, Trapping an overgod for countless years was equivalent to imprisoning an overgod. Thus, the Chaos Overgod was a transcendent existence in the heaven realm and the endless primal chaos. He never participated in the god wars, but no overgod dared to challenge his authority. The 5 elemental laws reached perfection. Yi Chen successfully passed the 32nd level of the Sword God Pagoda. Only now could he be considered an ultimate sword saint. Before this, he had only been an ultimate battle saint, much weaker than an ultimate sword saint. Of course, there were strong and weak ultimate sword saints as well. Yi Chen was one of the stronger ordinary ultimate sword saints. After all, Yi Chen had already comprehended 20 mid-level divine techniques, while most ordinary ultimate sword saints had only comprehended 10 or so mid-level divine techniques. After 100 million years, Yi Chen finally comprehended all of the primary divine skills. 120 million years later, Yi Chen had comprehended 40 types of mid-level divine skills. In the 150 million years, Yi Chen had comprehended 49 types of mid-level godly skills and was only missing one mid-level godly skill. Meanwhile, Yi Chen had passed the 33rd level of the Sword God Pagoda. Just a little bit more and I'll be able to pass the 34th floor. Middle-grade godly skills increased one's strength by too much. The 49th type of middle-grade godly skill was extremely powerful. It was countless times more powerful than the previous middle-grade godly skills. In the 155 million years later, Yi Chen's hard work paid off. He naturally comprehended the 50th type of mid-level godly skill, Rampage. The last primary divine skill is Sword Heart, the last mid-level godly skill is Rampage, and the first high-level godly skill is Sword Heart Rampage. Could these 3 be related? These names were not intentionally given by Yi Chen. In fact, the last primary divine skill was originally called Sword Heart, and the last mid-level godly skill was originally called Rampage. The 3 high-level godly skills also had their own names. Of course, although the names were the same, they were still different when used by different people. The names should be what gave them meaning, not what they looked like. After comprehending Rampage, Yi Chen went to challenge the Sword God Pagoda again. Rampage! With a swing of his sword, the Sword Saint puppet on the 34th level of the Sword God Pagoda seemed to be frozen in place. An unparalleled sword aura swept across its body, leaving behind thousands of fragments. Following that, the fragments were turned into ashes. He passed the 34th level of the Sword God Pagoda. In the 160th million years later, a war broke out again. This time, it was an all-out war. The Sword God Celestial System and the Demon Celestial System were all mobilized. In the sky, the Sword God Celestial System and the Demon Celestial System's True God stars also started to approach the Twilight Plane. Once they got close, it would be the time for the True God battle. In the Twilight Plane, blood dyed the ground, and corpses piled up like mountains. Hundreds of millions of battle sages fought against each other. Everyone seemed to have gone crazy, and all of them were unafraid of death. What a terrifying battlefield atmosphere! Yi Chen couldn't help but change his expression. He could feel that the Twilight Plane was enveloped by a terrifying battlefield atmosphere. Anyone who entered would be affected, and the affected battle sages would no longer fear death. His good friends, the Sweet Dew Sword Saint, the Shadowless Sword Saint, the Radiant Star Sword Saint, and the Scarlet Cloud Sword Saint, were affected, and their eyes turned blood red. Only the Ultimate Battle Sages and Ultimate Sword Saints were not affected, or were only slightly affected. This is the ultimate divine battle? Yi Chen seemed to see everyone's dusk, and it was extremely miserable. Raising his head, Yi Chen saw the true God stars. One had to know that in the past, the Twilight Plane had never seen the sun or the true God stars. Then let's kill. A divine battle was fate, and it was also the shortcut to becoming a true god. There were no other techniques. Every time Yi Chen used his sword, it would be the strongest mid-level divine technique, Rampage. Unparalleled sword chi swept past, and a river of blood appeared in front of him. It was unknown how many Demon Celestial System battle sages died at the hands of Yi Chen. It's him! In the distance, Battle Sage Yi saw Yi Chen. Without any hesitation, Battle Sage Yi he immediately turned and fled. At this moment, he was no match for Yi Chen. As an ultimate battle sage, he would not be affected by the atmosphere of the battlefield. Do you think you can escape? With a flash of sword light, Yi Chen arrived in the air above Battle Sage Yi and swept his sword down. Poof! Battle Sage Yi was dead. In the following years, Yi Chen killed the ultimate battle sage of Demonic Beast Mountain, Giant Hammer Battle Sage. Back then, these two ultimate battle sages were above Yi Chen, but now, they could not even take a single strike from Yi Chen. After passing the 34th level of the Sword God Pagoda, Yi Chen was 2 levels stronger than ordinary ultimate sword sages and 3 levels stronger than ordinary ultimate battle sages. They were not on the same level at all. The situation became more and more desperate. Even the ultimate sword sages of Sword God Palace were in danger. After more than 100 million years, the number of battle sages of Demon Celestial Palace with Bloodline God skills had increased. In Yi Chen's vision, 2 ultimate sword sages were in danger. One was Sword Sage Snowheart, and the other was Sword Sage Liancheng. Sword Sage Snowheart had once saved Yi Chen's life. Sword Sage Liancheng did not have much interaction with Yi Chen. I can only save one. Yi Chen frowned. His figure flashed, and he flew in the direction of Sword Sage Snowheart. Between the two, he could only choose Sword Sage Snowheart. Be careful. Seeing that Yi Chen was coming to help, Sword Sage Snowheart hurriedly reminded him. Her opponent was not an ordinary ultimate battle sage, but a bloodline battle sage. You saved my life back then. Now, I'm returning the favor. I still owe you one more life. Yi Chen turned around and smiled at Sword Sage Snowheart. He charged toward the bloodline battle sage. With a flash of sword chi, the bloodline battle sage was split into 2. The strength of a bloodline battle sage depended on how strong they were before the fusion. Interesting. Sword Sage Snowheart smiled. After this ultimate battle, perhaps another idealistic sword sage and peerless sword sage would be born. Chapter 1480. Yi Chen, who had perfected the 5 elemental laws and comprehended the final mid-grade divine skill, Rampage, was too powerful. Even in the Sword God Palace, he was one of the top existences. The ultimate sword saints of the Sword God Palace were usually divided into 4 levels. The first level was the idealistic sword saint and the invincible sword saint. The second level was the level of Yi Chen. The third level was the mid-grade ultimate sword saint, such as the Sunset Spirit Sword Saint. The fourth level was the ordinary ultimate sword saint, such as the Snow Heart Sword Saint. Of course, there were still differences between the same level. For example, the gap between the idealistic sword saint and the invincible sword saint was huge. According to the invincible sword saint, he couldn't even block one strike from the idealistic sword saint. Even though he was being humble, the idealistic sword saint was indeed very powerful. Otherwise, there was no need for the invincible sword saint to praise others and belittle himself. At the rear of the battlefield, Su Jing and Murong Qingqing were also participating in the battle. There were also some familiar faces like Duguju. They had already become mid-grade demigods. In the Heaven Realm, their innate talent was very good. However, in the Heaven Realm, their innate talent was only ordinary. Without a fated encounter, it would take them a long time to break through to the next level. It was already very difficult for them to become mid-grade demigods. They couldn't improve rapidly like Yi Chen. Although Su Jing and Murong Qingqing were only mid-grade demigods, which were mid-grade battle sages, they were fully armed. They were wearing 9-star Sky Saint armor and holding 9-star Sky Saint weapons. In the past, it was extremely difficult for him to obtain divine stones. But now, with his strength, he didn't lack divine stones at all, let alone contribution points. Wanting to obtain a few 9-star Sky Saint artifacts was as easy as eating and drinking. Besides, the most important thing was that the two of them were pregnant with Yi Chen's child. A demigod's pregnancy required a long time, unlike a mortal's 10 months. A low-grade demigod's pregnancy required at least 1,000,000 years, and a mid-grade demigod's pregnancy required 10 million years. Having Yi Chen's child was equivalent to having Yi Chen's bloodline. This bloodline would protect the two of them at a critical moment. With this, Yichen could rest assured that they would stay at the rear of the battlefield. King against king, general against general, soldier against soldier. The situation on the Twilight Plains had reached a stalemate. Apart from the countless battle sages and sword sages who had fallen in the beginning, the rate of deaths had actually slowed down. After all, in a situation where both sides were evenly matched, it would take a long time to finish off the other side. It could take a day or two, or even 10 days or half a month. Once he got rid of his opponent, there would be another massacre until he found a second opponent. In the center of the Twilight Plains, this was the grandest battlefield. Even the weakest of those who could fight here were ordinary ultimate battle saints. This was because the top forces of both sides were gathered here. Everyone understood that as long as the top forces of the other side were taken care of, no matter how many of them there were, they would all be useless. Green Lotus Sword Saint, let's join forces. The one who spoke was the Blackrock Sword Saint. The Blackrock Sword Saint was the same as Yichen, a second-tier ultimate sword saint. He was slightly weaker than Yichen, but not by much. He had already comprehended 45 mid-tier divine skills. All right. Yichen nodded. Their opponent was a bloodline battle saint. It was a fusion of 2 intermediate ultimate battle saints and 2 ordinary ultimate battle saints. Its strength was even stronger than Yichen's. We have directly fused together. You are just cooperating with each other. How can you be a match for us? The bloodline battle saint swooped down, plowing a deep trench in the ground. Go! Yichen and the Blackrock Sword Saint charged forward, one on the left and one on the right. The first to attack was the Blackrock Sword Saint. He raised his black greatsword high and slashed out. Black sword chi strangled the bloodline battle saint's body like a millstone. However, the bloodline battle saint's defense was too strong. When the sword chi strangled the bloodline battle saint, it only produced countless sparks, not even a white mark. However, it was not completely useless. At least it slowed down the bloodline battle saint and caused him to pause. Crisscross. Holding the 5-element sword, Yichen slashed out, and an unparalleled sword chi brushed past the bloodline battle saint's body. Poof! A large amount of blood flew out. The bloodline battle saint was injured. In terms of attack power, Yichen was much stronger than the Blackrock Sword Saint. After all, Yichen had comprehended the last intermediate divine skill. Damn it, Great Destruction Axe. The bloodline battle saint's weapon was a blood-red axe. With a swing of the axe light split the sky and the earth. The Blackrock Sword Saint was directly sent flying, and Yichen was also forced to retreat. The ground was a mess. Fusion is indeed not something that can be matched by cooperation. Yichen frowned slightly. Fusion was a superposition of strength, and it was already amazing that the cooperation could double the effect. The bloodline battle saint was only slightly stronger than Yichen. He thought that with the Blackrock Sword Saint, they should be able to contend, but they were still slightly weaker. Die! The bloodline battle saint's attack became more and more violent, not giving the two a chance to fight back. The Blackrock Sword Saint spat out blood continuously, and his primordial spirit was injured. Yichen could hold on, but unfortunately, he could not find a chance to defeat his opponent. With his attack power, it would be very difficult for him to defeat his opponent. His full-strength attack could only injure his opponent slightly. Of course, he was not weak either, and it would be difficult for his opponent to injure him. Blackrock Sword Saint, step back. Leave this to me. The Green Lotus Sword Saint said to the Blackrock Sword Saint. Okay. Although the Blackrock Sword Saint was very unhappy, he knew that it was useless for him to stay. Since even the Blackrock Sword Saint could not help him, there was almost no one else who could help him. It was useless to rely on more people. After all, he was not the only one in trouble. The bloodline battle saint of the Demon God Palace was indeed a trump card, enough to change the direction of the God Wars. When we fuse together, our endurance is beyond your imagination. Let's see how long you can last. The bloodline battle saint laughed wildly. 1 week passed. 1 month passed. Yichen was gradually losing. In the blink of an eye, 1 year passed. This was the longest battle that Yi Chen had ever experienced. Yi Chen's mouth was bleeding, and his primordial spirit was beginning to be injured. Die! 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 The bloodline battle saint was suppressing Yi Chen. It's not certain who will die. An astonishing sword intent suddenly erupted from Yi Chen's body. It was not just one sword intent, but three. The three supreme sword intents intertwined, creating an unprecedented resonance. A year of difficult battles had once again allowed Yi Chen's potential to explode. It should be known that the three supreme sword intents were resonating all the time, but their progress was getting slower and slower. However, after more than 100 million years, the three supreme sword intents were gradually approaching perfection. All they needed was an opportunity to temper themselves. Boom! Finally, the three supreme sword intents broke through to perfection and merged with his divine power, causing Yi Chen's divine power to be strengthened countless times. Before this, Yi Chen's divine power was already at the level of an ultimate sword saint. At this time, Yi Chen's divine power had surpassed that of an ultimate sword saint. This was because no ultimate sword saint had three supreme sword intents. At most, they had two, such as the solitary sword saint and the absolute sword saint. His sword intents had reached perfection, and so had Yi Chen's divine power. Coupled with the 5 elemental laws, the current Yi Chen was truly an ultimate sword saint. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.